I'm Remy 35, and I've spent the last decade saving for my dream home, a place that was finally just mine after growing up under my parents' controlling roof. When my neighbor Scott called me during an important work meeting to tell me there was a moving truck at my house, my heart sank. I immediately made excuses to my boss and raced home, my mind spinning with confusion. Who could possibly be moving things into my house while I was at work? Before I tell you what I found when I pulled into my driveway, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family overstep boundaries in ways you never imagined possible. Growing up, our house was always cramped. My parents, my older brother Marcus, and I shared a modest 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood in Michigan. From an early age, it was clear that Marcus was the golden child. He was athletic, outgoing, and had the charisma my parents admired. I was quieter, more analytical, and preferred computers to football. This difference created an unspoken hierarchy in our family dynamic. When Marcus needed new sports equipment, it was a priority. When I needed a computer for school projects, I heard maybe next month for nearly a year. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. Marcus received praise for C grades because at least he tried, while my A's were expected and rarely acknowledged. Our parents weren't bad people. They provided for us, kept us fed and clothed, and there was always a roof over our heads. But the favoritism was undeniable and shaped much of my worldview. I learned early that if I wanted something, I needed to work for it myself because no one would hand it to me. Marcus followed a predictable path through his 20s. He got married young to Jenna, a sweet but somewhat passive woman who enabled his impulsive tendencies. They had 2 kids almost immediately, Lily and Jackson, before they had established any financial stability. Marcus bounced from job to job, always with big ambitions, but little follow-through. Whenever crisis struck, which was often, my parents were there with open wallets. Car payments, rent when they faced eviction, even bailing Marcus out after he made a terrible investment in a friend's business venture that predictably failed. Each time there was the promise that this is the last time and he's really turning things around now. Meanwhile, I took a different route. I worked through college, earning scholarships and taking out minimal loans. I studied computer science, secured a solid entry-level job at an IT consulting firm, and lived well below my means. For 7 years, I shared apartments with roommates, drove an old but reliable car, and saved diligently. My goal was clear financial independence and my own home. When I finally had enough for a down payment, I spent months searching for the perfect place. Not too large, not too small, in a quiet neighborhood, with good resale potential. I found it 3 years ago. A modest but well-maintained 3-bedroom ranch-style house with a small yard. The mortgage was manageable on my salary, and having an extra bedroom for guests, and another I converted to a home office, felt like luxury after years of shared living spaces. The day I got the keys was one of the proudest moments of my life. No one had handed me this achievement. I'd earned every square foot through discipline and hard work. My parents came to the housewarming party, made appropriate noises about being proud. But there was an undercurrent of confusion about why I'd waste money on a house when I could have continued renting. Marcus came too with Jenna and the kids. He walked through my new home with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between envy and dismissal. "Pretty nice for a bachelor pad," he said, in a tone that suggested my achievement was somehow less significant because I wasn't providing for a family. The past year had been especially tense in our family dynamics. Marcus lost his job at a construction company where he'd surprisingly managed to stay for almost 2 years. The company downsized, and Marcus, being one of the newer employees, was among the first let go. This led to increased financial pressure on him and Jenna, especially with 2 growing children to support. Family gatherings became awkward affairs. Marcus would brag about job prospects that sounded increasingly far-fetched, while my parents nodded along encouragingly. Whenever I mentioned anything positive about my own life or career, the subject would quickly change back to Marcus's needs or his children's activities. I'd learned to share less about my successes, to avoid the subtle resentment they seemed to trigger. My neighbor Scott had become a good friend since I moved in. He was a retired teacher who spent most days tending to his impressive garden or sitting on his porch reading. We'd developed a routine of weekend morning coffee on my deck, talking about everything from local politics to gardening tips, he generously shared as I attempted to cultivate my own modest vegetable patch. Scott was observant and protective of our quiet neighborhood, keeping an eye on things and letting neighbors know if anything seemed amiss. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I woke up early, went for a run, showered, and had breakfast in my kitchen while reviewing notes for an important client meeting scheduled for that afternoon. Nothing suggested it would be anything other than a normal workday. I locked up, waved to Scott, who was already out watering his roses, and headed to the office. The meeting was with a potential new client, a local healthcare network, looking to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. Our team had been preparing for weeks, and as the lead consultant, I was in the middle of presenting our proposal when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it initially, but when it immediately vibrated again, I grew concerned. I rarely received consecutive calls unless something was wrong. When it happened a third time, I excused myself briefly from the meeting. Scott's name was on my screen, along with 3 missed calls. My neighbor never called, unless it was important. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I stepped into the hallway and returned his call. "Remy," Scott said, his voice tense. "There's a moving truck at your house. Your parents' car is in the driveway too, and what looks like your brother's SUV. They're carrying furniture and boxes inside. I thought you should know." My mind went blank for a moment. A moving truck. At my house? It made no sense. No one had keys except for me, and the spare I kept for emergencies locked in my desk at work. "How long have they been there?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "About an hour," Scott replied. "I thought maybe you'd arranged something and forgot to mention it, but it seemed odd that you weren't here, so I thought I should call." "You did the right thing," I said already, walking back to the conference room to make my excuses. "I'm heading home now." The 20-minute drive from my office to my house felt like hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white as my mind raced through possibilities, none of which made any sense. Had there been some massive miscommunication? Was someone playing an elaborate prank? Or was my gut instinct right, that somehow without my knowledge or consent my family was inserting themselves into my life in a way that crossed every reasonable boundary? I called my boss from the car, apologizing profusely about the emergency that required my immediate attention. He was understanding, but clearly disappointed, given the importance of the meeting. I promised to follow up with the clients that evening and reschedule as soon as possible, knowing this unexpected crisis might cost me professionally. As I turned onto my street, the scene that greeted me confirmed Scott's report. A medium-sized moving truck was backed into my driveway. My father was directing 2 moving men carrying what looked like a dresser toward my front door. My mother's sedan was parked on the street, as was Marcus's SUV, with the fading bumper sticker from his children's elementary school. I parked hastily behind the moving truck, effectively blocking it from leaving, and rushed toward my house. Scott was watching discreetly from his porch, and he gave me a concerned nod as I passed. The front door of my house was propped open with a box, and I could hear voices inside. The high-pitched excitement of children, my mother's familiar laugh, and Marcus's booming voice giving directions about where something should go. Walking into my own home felt surreal. The living room furniture had been pushed against one wall to make space for what I recognized as Marcus and Jenna's couch. Boxes labeled kitchen and kids' toys were stacked near the hallway. My carefully arranged bookshelf had been partially emptied, the books piled on the floor to make room for what looked like framed family photos and children's participation trophies. My mother spotted me first. "Remy, there you are. We thought you'd be at work all day." She approached for a hug, as if this was a planned family gathering, not a home invasion. "What is happening here?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, despite the chaos around me. My father entered from the kitchen, a sandwich in hand. He'd apparently already made himself comfortable enough to raid my refrigerator. "Son, we were going to call you tonight. Things moved faster than expected." Before he could continue, Marcus emerged from the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "Hey, little brother," surprise. His tone was jovial, but his eyes held a hint of defiance. "Surprise," I echoed, looking from one family member to another. "Someone explain." "Now." Jenna appeared behind Marcus, looking slightly uncomfortable, but attempting a bright smile. "We got evicted," she said simply. "The landlord sold the building, and all tenants had to be out by this week. We had nowhere else to go. And you decided to move into my house without asking me. The disbelief in my voice was evident. Marcus shrugged. Mom and Dad said it would be fine. You have all this space for just one person. We figured you'd want to help family in need. I turned to my parents, who were nodding along with Marcus's explanation, as if it was perfectly reasonable. You have 3 bedrooms, my mother added. You don't need that much space for yourself. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. You don't need that. The same words I'd heard throughout childhood whenever something of mine was given to Marcus. How did you even get in? I asked, noticing more details of the invasion. Unpictures. Moved my throw pillows, replaced with their own toys already scattered on the floor. We had a key made from the spare at your parents' house, Marcus said casually. You know, the emergency one. The emergency key that was supposed to be used only in genuine emergencies, not as permission to enter my home and rearrange my life without my consent. I took a deep breath, trying to process the situation rationally, despite the anger bubbling inside me. This isn't okay. You can't just move into someone's house without their permission. We're not someone, Remy. We're family, my father said firmly, as if that single word erased all need for basic respect and boundaries. The kids have already set up in the guest bedroom, my mother added, seemingly oblivious to my growing distress. And we thought you could move your office things to your bedroom, so Marcus and Jenna could have that room. I stared at her in disbelief. They had not only moved in without permission, but were now suggesting I rearrange my life and workspace to accommodate them. How long are you planning to stay? I asked, desperately, hoping there was at least some timeline in their minds. Marcus and Jenna exchanged glances. Well, until we get back on our feet, Marcus said vaguely. I'm job hunting, but you know how it is right now. Could be a few months, maybe more. A few months, I repeated incredulously. Or however long it takes, my father interjected. Family helps family, Remy. That's how we raised you. I looked around at my transformed living room, the moving men still bringing in more boxes, and felt a wave of powerlessness. This was my home, purchased with my money, maintained with my effort, and yet in the span of a few hours, it had been colonized without my consent. We need to talk about this properly, I said, trying to maintain composure. There need to be clear boundaries and a definite timeline if this is going to work at all. Of course, my mother said soothingly, but the dismissive glance she shared with my father told me they had no intention of taking my concerns seriously. Lily and Jackson are so excited to live with Uncle Remy, Jenna added clearly, trying to use the children as emotional leverage. As if on cue, my niece and nephew ran in from the backyard. Uncle Remy, they shouted, running to hug my legs. Despite my anger at the situation, I couldn't help but return their affection. They were innocent in all this. We're gonna live here now, 7-year-old Lily announced proudly. Mommy says we can plant flowers in your garden. And Daddy said I can put my race car track in the garage, 5-year-old Jackson added. I looked at Marcus, who shrugged unapologetically. They had clearly been telling the children this was a done deal, further boxing me into a corner. Why don't you help the movers with the last few boxes, my mother suggested to me, as if I was a willing participant in this takeover. I stepped outside for a moment, needing air and space to think. Scott caught my eye from his yard and walked over. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Not even close, I replied. My brother and his family have apparently decided to move in, without asking me first. Scott's eyebrows shot up. That's bold. That's one word for it, I said grimly. Let me know if you need anything, he offered, genuine concern in his voice. I thanked him and turned back to the house, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was necessary. This couldn't stand, but as I watched my niece and nephew excitedly exploring what they thought was their new home, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple or clean resolution. The tangled web of family obligation, guilt, and manipulation was already tightening around me. By evening, the moving truck had departed, leaving my house transformed into a chaotic blend of my possessions and my brother's family's belongings. The living room was now dominated by their furniture, my carefully chosen pieces pushed aside to make room. The guest bedroom had been completely overtaken by the children, their bunk beds assembled, where my comfortable futon once stood walls, now adorned with posters of cartoon characters and sports teams. Most disturbing was the discovery that they had been through my personal spaces. My home office, the room where I not only worked, but kept important documents and personal mementos, had been partially boxed up in preparation for relocation to a corner of my bedroom. My desk had been moved without disconnecting my computer properly, potentially damaging equipment I needed for work. When I confronted Marcus about touching my work things, his response was infuriating. "Relax, it's just stuff," he said dismissively. "We need the space more than you need. A whole room for your computer. You can work from anywhere, right? That's the beauty of your job." I tried explaining that my home office was set up specifically for client video calls with proper lighting and a professional background, and that moving it to my bedroom would be inappropriate and unprofessional. "Just use one of those fake backgrounds," Jenna suggested, as if the solution was that simple. That first night established the pattern that would define the coming days. Every attempt at rational conversation was met with dismissiveness. Every concern I raised was minimized, and every boundary I tried to establish was trampled almost immediately. My parents took over kitchen duties, which might have been helpful if they hadn't completely reorganized my cabinets, without asking, and criticized my bachelor food choices. My mother discarded some specialty ingredients I had been saving for a specific recipe, claiming they looked expired, though the dates clearly showed otherwise. "You should be grateful," my father commented when I expressed frustration. "Your mother is cooking for you now. Most single men would appreciate a home-cooked meal." The implication was clear. I should be thankful for this invasion, not upset by it. This gaslighting continued at every turn. When I asked about their plans for contributing to household expenses, my question was met with shocked expressions. "We're family," my mother said, as if that explained everything. "We wouldn't charge you rent if you needed to stay with us." "But I didn't ask to stay with you," I pointed out. "You moved into my house without permission." "Why are you being so selfish?" Marcus asked, his tone accusatory. After everything Mom and Dad did for us growing up, all the sacrifices they made, the guilt trip was expertly deployed, hitting all the buttons installed during childhood. "Remember when you needed braces?" my father added. "That was $3,000 we could have used for a family vacation, but we invested in you instead." The fact that Marcus had received similar orthodontic work, plus years of sports equipment, summer camps, and a car when he turned 16, seemed conveniently forgotten. Jenna was subtler in her approach, but no less effective. She would make passive-aggressive comments about my fancy coffee machine or expensive furniture, while sighing about how they'd always had to make do with less. The implication was clear. I had more than I deserved, more than I needed, while they struggled. The children, meanwhile, had been given free rein of the house. Despite my requests that certain areas be off-limits, I'd come home from work to find sticky fingerprints on my television screen or juice spilled on my couch. Any mention of rules or boundaries was met with looks that suggested I was being unreasonably strict with innocent children. By the third day, news had spread through the extended family grapevine. I began receiving calls and texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins, praising me for taking in Marcus and his family during their time of need. "It's so wonderful what you're doing for your brother," my Aunt Linda gushed over the phone. "Opening your home like that. We're all so proud of you." When I tried to explain that the arrangement had not been my idea and was not working well, she seemed confused. "But they're family," she said, echoing the refrain I was growing to dread. "And it's not like you need all that space for yourself." There it was again, the assumption that as a single person, my space, my privacy, and my boundaries were somehow less valid than those of a family. The narrative had been established without my input generous. Remy was helping his struggling brother, and any objection I raised would cast me as the villain of the story. The pressure to maintain family peace was immense. Each day I woke up hoping for some sign that this was temporary, that Marcus was actively job hunting, that my parents were encouraging him to find his own place. Instead, I saw them settling in more permanently. Marcus spent his days playing video games on my television, while Jenna took lengthy shopping trips, returning with new decorative items for their bedroom. My home no longer felt like mine. I began staying late at work to avoid the chaos that greeted me each evening. I'd sit in my car in the parking lot, dreading the return to what had once been my sanctuary. The one place that had been truly mine, earned through years of hard work and discipline, had been commandeered without a second thought. The internal struggle was perhaps the most difficult part. Logically, I knew my boundaries were being violated in unacceptable ways. But emotionally, decades of family dynamics had programmed me to doubt myself when standing up to them. Was I being selfish, ungenerous, a bad son, and brother? These questions plagued me, even as I watched my carefully built life being disrupted by people who showed no respect for what they were taking from me. The most insidious part was how my family had positioned themselves as the victims in a situation they had created. Marcus would sigh heavily when I asked about his job search, lamenting how hard the market was and how much pressure he was under to provide for his family. My parents would reminisce about financial struggles they'd faced when raising us strongly, implying that my current discomfort was nothing compared to their sacrifices. Any attempt to establish house rules was met with resistance. When I suggested quiet hours after 9 so I could rest before work, my mother laughed it off. "Children need to express themselves," she said. "You can't expect them to be silent just because you want peace and quiet." When I asked that my home office remain untouched during work hours, Marcus scoffed. "Must be nice to have a job where you can just close a door and ignore everyone else in the house," he said bitterly. The message was consistent. My needs were secondary, my boundaries unreasonable, my house no longer mine to control. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. Sleep eluded me as I lay awake, listening to unfamiliar noises in my own home, my mind racing with resentment and anxiety. My work was suffering. I'd missed deadlines and performed poorly in client meetings due to lack of sleep and constant stress. And still there was no end in sight. No plans were discussed, no timeline established, no acknowledgement that this arrangement was temporary. Every subtle inquiry about their plans was deflected or turned around on me. "Why are you so eager to get rid of us?" my mother would ask, her voice wounded. "Don't you care about your niece and nephew having a stable home?" Marcus would counter. Each question was a trap, designed to make me the bad guy for wanting my own home back. I was being erased from my own life one boundary violation at a time, and the worst part was that it was being done by the people who were supposed to care about me most. A week and a half into the unwanted cohabitation, I was barely holding it together. My sleep was disrupted by Marcus and Jenna's late-night television watching the children's early morning cartoons, and my own anxiety about the situation. Coffee had become my primary food group, as I struggled to maintain my professional responsibilities while my home life crumbled around me. Marcus had made exactly zero progress on finding a job. Instead, he'd set up what he called a command center on my dining room table, ostensibly for job searching, but primarily used for fantasy sports leagues and social media. When I asked about his progress one evening, he vaguely mentioned networking and exploring opportunities without any concrete details. "These things take time," my father defended him. "Not everyone can just walk into a good job like you did." The revisionist history was staggering. My good job had come after 4 years of college, an unpaid internship where I worked nights at a convenience store to make ends meet, and starting at the bottom rung of my company. None of it had been handed to me, yet the family narrative painted my success as some kind of lucky break rather than the result of hard work and planning. Meanwhile, the financial strain was becoming impossible to ignore. My grocery bill had tripled, with 5 additional people eating 3 meals a day in my house. Utilities were skyrocketing. Longer showers, lights left on in every room, the television running constantly. Marcus and Jenna contributed nothing, operating under the assumption that everything in my home was now communal property. I discovered they were using my streaming accounts, had changed my preferred settings, and even ordered movies on my cable account. When I mentioned the additional charges, Jenna looked surprised. "But we're family," she said, the familiar refrain. "We thought everything was shared now." The children, despite my genuine affection for them, were becoming increasingly difficult to handle as they settled in and tested boundaries. Lily had decided my bookshelf was her art station, resulting in crayon marks on my hardwood floor and paint splatters on books I'd had since college. Jackson treated the entire house as an extension of his playground, leaving toy cars in hazardous locations and once breaking a framed photograph as he raced through the hallway. Any attempt at discipline was immediately undermined by my parents or Marcus and Jenna. "They're just being kids," was the constant excuse, followed by, "You wouldn't understand, since you don't have children." My parents had begun inviting other family members over without asking me first. I came home one evening to find my aunt and uncle sitting in my living room drinking my wine, commenting on how generous I was being. The narrative that I had willingly opened my home to my struggling brother had become so entrenched that any attempt to correct it made me look petty and revisionist. A critical work deadline was approaching, a major proposal for a client that could potentially lead to a promotion if successful. I'd been trying to work on it evenings and weekends but found it nearly impossible with the constant interruptions and chaos in the house. My home office had still not been officially relocated, but it had become a partial storage space for boxes. My family hadn't bothered to unpack, making it difficult to even reach my desk. The final straw came on a Thursday. I had taken a rare day off work to focus on the proposal, planning to use the quiet hours while the children were at school to concentrate. Instead, my parents announced over breakfast that they were taking a day trip to visit friends and would be back that evening. "You'll be here for the kids after school, right?" my mother said. Not really a question. "I took today off to work on an important project," I explained, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. "I can't babysit." "It's not babysitting when it's your niece and nephew," my father said dismissively. "Besides, Marcus has a job interview." This was the first I'd heard of any interview. "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased that there might be some progress. "Where's the interview?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "It's more of a networking thing. A buddy from my old job is meeting me for lunch, might have some leads." "So not an actual interview, just lunch with a friend. And apparently more important than my work deadline." "Jenna has a spa appointment," my mother added. "She's been so stressed with the move. She needs some self-care time." The injustice was staggering. Jenna needed self-care after the stress of moving into someone else's house without permission, while I was expected to put aside actual work responsibilities to accommodate everyone else's schedules. "I can't do it," I said firmly. "I have to finish this proposal today. It's too important." The backlash was immediate. "So, your job is more important than family?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "Someone has to pay the mortgage," I pointed out, "and all the extra expenses you've added since moving in." The argument escalated quickly, with Marcus jumping in to accuse me of being selfish and uncaring, my father listing all the times they had helped me over the years, and my mother near tears at my apparent callousness. In the end, Marcus canceled his networking lunch with obvious martyrdom, making sure everyone knew what a sacrifice he was making. My parents went on their day trip as planned, and I retreated to my bedroom with my laptop since the home office was unusable. Hours later, after finally making progress on the proposal, in the relative quiet of my room, I stepped out to make a cup of coffee. The house seemed empty, and I realized Marcus must have taken the children somewhere, perhaps to a park or a friend's house. Returning to my bedroom, I noticed immediately that something was different. My closet door was open, and items had been moved on my dresser. With growing alarm, I checked my nightstand drawer where I kept personal items and found it had been opened and rummaged through. Even the locked box where I kept important documents showed signs of tampering. Marcus and the kids returned as I was still processing this violation. When confronted, he shrugged casually. "Lily needed art supplies for a school project. I knew you had some nice markers in your room from when you were working on those design sketches. You went through my personal things." I was incredulous. "That's my private space." "It's not like you have anything to hide," he said dismissively. "And Lily really needed those markers. Hers are all dried out. That doesn't give you the right to go through my things. This is my house, my bedroom, my private space." The children looked up at my raised voice, concern on their faces. Jackson started to cry, and Lily backed away from me fearfully. "Now look what you've done," Marcus said accusingly. "You've scared the kids." That was it. The moment something inside me snapped. Years of being the responsible one, the one who sacrificed, the one whose needs came last, culminated in a rush of anger and clarity. "This is my house," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I bought it. I pay for it. I didn't invite any of you here. You showed up, took over, rearranged my things, used my resources, invaded my privacy, and have the audacity to act like I'm the one being unreasonable." Marcus's face darkened. You've always had it easy, Remy. Always been the smart one, the responsible one, the one who never makes mistakes. Some of us have real struggles, real responsibilities. Like children, I countered. The children you chose to have without having the financial stability to support them. The same children you're now using as pawns to manipulate me. My parents arrived home in the middle of this confrontation. Hearing raised voices, they rushed in immediately, taking Marcus's side without even asking what had happened. He's upset because I borrowed some markers from his room for Lily, Marcus explained, conveniently omitting the part about invading my private space and going through my things. You're this upset over some markers? My mother asked incredulously. When your brother is just trying to take care of his children. He has children to think about, my father, added the familiar refrain. You only have yourself. The implication was clear, and crushing my life, my space, my boundaries were less important because I wasn't a parent. The years of hard work I'd put into building my career and creating a home for myself counted for nothing against Marcus's decision to have children he couldn't support. If you can't help your family in their time of need, are you really part of this family at all? My mother asked, delivering the line with surgical precision to inflict maximum guilt. But instead of the usual shame and acquiescence, this tactic had always provoked, I felt something different this time. Righteous anger and sudden clarity. If being part of this family means having no boundaries, no privacy, no respect for my space, or my work, or my life, then maybe I don't want to be part of it, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. No one had expected this response. Not my parents, not Marcus, and honestly, not even me. But once the words were out, I realized their truth. This wasn't love. This was exploitation dressed up as family obligation. You have 2 weeks to find another place to live. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. All of you. This arrangement isn't working, and it's not going to work. I want my house back. The stunned expressions on their faces might have been comical in any other context. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had firmly, unequivocally stood up for myself against the tidal wave of family expectation and guilt. And in that moment of clarity, despite the hurt and anger and years of accumulated resentment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: the power of owning my own life again. The aftermath of my ultimatum was immediate and intense. My mother burst into tears, collapsing onto the couch in dramatic fashion. My father's face flushed red with anger. Marcus stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and building rage. You can't be serious. Marcus finally said, his voice dangerously low. You would put your own family out on the street. I'm giving you 2 weeks, I replied, holding my ground, despite the familiar tide of guilt rising within me. That's more than the 0 notice you gave me when you moved in. My mother's sobs grew louder. How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you? My father stepped toward me, his finger pointed accusingly. This is not how we raised you. Family takes care of family. Always. Is that what this is? I asked, gesturing around at my transformed home. Taking care of family. Moving in without permission. Rearranging my life. Without asking, invading my privacy. Undermining me in my own home. That's your definition of family care. Jenna had joined the scene, standing slightly behind Marcus, her expression worried. The children hovered at the edge of the room, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Where are we supposed to go? Jenna asked quietly, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had always been caught in the middle, enabling Marcus's poor choices, but also suffering their consequences. The same place you would have gone if I didn't own this house, I answered. You must have had a plan before you decided to move here. We didn't have a plan. Marcus admitted, his tone shifting to one I recognized all too well, the voice he used when trying to garner sympathy. We were desperate. The eviction happened so fast. Mom and Dad offered your place because they knew you'd want to help. Without asking me first, I pointed out. That's the issue here. Not that you needed help, but that no one respected me enough to ask before taking over my home. My mother had recovered enough to join the argument again. You're being ridiculous. This is what families do. They help each other without keeping score. Except you've been keeping score my entire life, I countered. Every favor, every financial help gets brought up, whenever I don't fall in line. That's not unconditional love. That's a transactional relationship where I'm always expected to pay more. The conversation devolved from there, cycling through familiar patterns of guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation. My parents threatened to tell the entire extended family how heartless I was being. Marcus suggested he would tell his children that Uncle Remy doesn't love them enough to let them stay. "Go ahead," I said, a strange calm settling over me as I recognized the manipulation tactics for what they were. "Tell them whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that this is my house, and I get to decide who lives in it." The argument continued late into the night with periods of heated exchange, followed by tense silence, then renewed attempts at different angles of persuasion. By midnight, everyone had retreated to their respective rooms, the atmosphere in the house thick with unresolved tension. The next morning, I left early for work, avoiding the awkward breakfast interaction. As I backed out of the driveway, Scott was retrieving his newspaper. He waved me over. "Heard quite a commotion last night," he said cautiously. "Everything okay?" I gave him a brief explanation of the situation, feeling relieved to talk to someone outside the family dynamic. "For what it's worth," Scott said, "I think you're doing the right thing. I've watched you work hard for that house. And the way they moved in without asking?" He shook his head. "That's not right, no matter how you slice it." His support meant more than I could express. "Thanks, Scott. If they try to claim I invited them, or that this was all planned, would you be willing to set the record straight?" "Absolutely," he agreed. "I saw how shocked you were that day. There's no way this was your idea." At work, I contacted a lawyer during my lunch break, explaining the situation and asking about my options if my family refused to leave after the 2-week deadline. The consultation was sobering but clarifying. "Since they moved in without a formal agreement and without your explicit permission, they're technically trespassers, not tenants," the lawyer explained. "However, because they've been there for nearly 2 weeks already, and because they're family members, the situation gets murky. If they refuse to leave, you'd likely need to go through formal eviction proceedings, which can take time." She advised documenting everything, being clear and consistent about the deadline, and suggested changing the locks once they moved out to prevent re-entry. The conversation left me with a clearer path forward, but also highlighted the potential ugliness ahead if my family dug in their heels. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. Instead of the usual chaos, the house was eerily quiet. My parents sat stiffly in the living room, not watching television or engaging in their usual activities. Marcus and Jenna were nowhere to be seen, though I could hear the children playing quietly in their room. "We've been thinking about what you said," my father began, his tone carefully neutral. "We still think you're being unreasonable, but we understand it's your house." The concession surprised me, though I noticed it came with the qualifier that I was still in the wrong. "Marcus is making some calls," my mother added, "seeing what options we have." I nodded, cautiously optimistic that they were taking the deadline seriously. "I appreciate that." The conversation didn't progress much further, but the acknowledgement, however, grudging, felt like a small victory. The next few days established a new pattern in the house. My family hadn't given up on changing my mind, but their tactics shifted. Instead of direct confrontation, they employed a combination of silent treatment and passive-aggressive comments. My mother would sigh heavily whenever I entered a room. My father made pointed remarks about family loyalty within my earshot. Marcus alternated between ignoring me completely and making veiled comments about the difficulties of finding affordable housing for a family of 4. The children, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, became the unwitting weapons in this Cold War. Lily would ask innocently, "Uncle Remy, why are you making us leave? Don't you want us to live with you anymore?" Jackson would climb into my lap with a storybook, then say, "Daddy says we might not have a home soon." These moments were the hardest to navigate. I loved my niece and nephew and didn't want them caught in this adult conflict, but I also recognized the manipulation happening through them. Meanwhile, the extended family mobilized. Calls and texts poured in from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all expressing varying degrees of disappointment and shock at my decision to kick out my brother's family. The narrative had been carefully crafted to paint me as the villain, with key details about the unauthorized move-in conveniently omitted. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was particularly persistent. "I just don't understand how you could do this," she said during one call. "They're your flesh and blood. And those poor children. When I explained the full situation, how they had moved in without permission, rearranged my home, invaded my privacy, and refused to discuss any timeline for leaving, she paused. They just moved in without asking you first, she clarified. Yes, I confirmed. I came home from work to find them already moving in. No discussion, no warning. Another pause. That's not what your mother told me. The conversation shifted after that. While she didn't fully take my side, her tone became more understanding. I can see why you're upset. That wasn't right of them. Though I still hope you can work something out. Those kids adore you. This pattern repeated with several family members. When presented with the full story, many adjusted their perspective, though few were willing to openly side against my parents and Marcus. The most difficult moments came during the second week, as the deadline approached, and it became clear that my family had made minimal progress in finding alternative arrangements. Marcus claimed to have inquired about several apartments, but found nothing suitable. My parents suggested they could all move back to their house temporarily, but expressed concern about the cramped space. We're trying, my mother insisted. But 2 weeks isn't very much time to find a place for a family of 4. The guilt was heavy, but I held firm to the deadline. 2 weeks is generous considering I had zero notice when you all moved in. As the deadline grew closer, my anxiety increased. What if they simply refused to leave? Would I really call the police to remove my own family? Could I follow through with formal eviction proceedings? The prospect was nauseating, but the alternative, continuing to live under this intolerable arrangement, seemed worse. The uncertainty kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios, and questioning my resolve. Was I being too harsh? Too selfish? The voices of doubt installed by years of family conditioning were difficult to silence. But then I would remember the violations, my space invaded, my privacy disregarded, my needs dismissed. I would think of my home, the one place that was supposed to be mine, overrun without my consent. And in those moments, I found the strength to maintain my boundaries. The journey to this point had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. For perhaps the first time I was seeing the unhealthy patterns in my family, with clear eyes recognizing the manipulation tactics that had always made me doubt myself. And despite the discomfort, despite the conflict, despite the uncertain outcome ahead, there was something undeniably empowering about finally standing up for myself. 3 days before the deadline, something unexpected happened. I came home from work to find an additional car in the driveway, a sleek sedan I recognized as belonging to my Aunt Regina, my mother's younger sister. Regina had always been something of an outlier in the family, too unsuccessful, independent, and less inclined to participate in the family's more dysfunctional dynamics. Inside, I found Regina sitting at my dining room table with my parents Marcus and Jenna. The children were nowhere to be seen, presumably in their room, or outside playing. Regina greeted me with a warm but serious smile. Good timing. We were just discussing the situation. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but not hostile. My mother looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. My father sat stiffly, arms crossed. Marcus and Jenna seemed subdued. I asked Regina to come, my mother admitted reluctantly. We needed a perspective. This admission surprised me. My mother rarely sought outside opinions, especially when family conflicts were involved. I've been hearing different versions of what's happening here, Regina said, her direct manner refreshing after weeks of passive-aggressive communication. So, I wanted to get the full picture from everyone involved. Over the next hour, Regina facilitated a conversation unlike any I'd experienced with my family before. She insisted each person speak without interruption, starting with me, explaining my perspective, then moving to my parents, and finally Marcus and Jenna. Let me make sure I understand, Regina summarized after everyone had spoken. Marcus and Jenna were evicted from their apartment. Instead of discussing options with Remy, you all decided he would certainly agree to house everyone, so you moved in while he was at work. When he understandably objected, you made him feel selfish and ungrateful for wanting his own space back. Is that about right? Put so plainly, the situation's absurdity was impossible to deny. My parents shifted uncomfortably. We thought he would want to help family, my father maintained, though with less conviction than before. By having no choice in the matter, Regina challenged. By having his home invaded without his consent. That's a harsh way to put it, my mother protested. But accurate, Regina countered. Let's be honest here. This wasn't about helping family. This was about taking the path of least resistance. Marcus and Jenna needed housing, and rather than dealing with the inconvenience yourselves or helping them find an appropriate solution, you volunteered Remy's space because it was easier for you. The silence that followed was telling. Regina turned to Marcus and Jenna. And you two. I understand being in a difficult situation, but moving into someone's home without their permission, how would you feel if someone did that to you? Jenna at least had the grace to look ashamed. We were desperate, she said quietly, and when Remy's parents suggested it, you still could have called him, Regina pointed out. Asked permission. Discussed terms and timelines. We were afraid he'd say no. Marcus admitted, finally voicing the truth that had been evident all along. So, you decided to force his hand. Regina nodded. Create a situation where he'd seem like the bad guy if he objected. Marcus didn't respond, but his expression confirmed Regina's assessment. Regina turned back to my parents. This pattern isn't new. You've been enabling Marcus at Remy's expense for years. It was wrong when they were children, and it's wrong now. My mother started to object, but Regina held up her hand. I've watched this dynamic play out their entire lives. Marcus makes poor choices, faces consequences, and everyone rushes to shield him while Remy is expected to fend for himself. It's created a grown man who can't function independently, and another who doesn't believe his family respects him. Is that really what you wanted for your sons? The uncomfortable silence that followed suggested her words had hit home. For perhaps the first time my parents were being forced to confront the long-term consequences of their parenting patterns. So what now? My father finally asked, his tone surprisingly subdued. Now you respect Remy's deadline, and his home, Regina said firmly. And you help Marcus and Jenna find appropriate housing without making it Remy's problem. To my amazement, no one argued. Regina's outside perspective had somehow penetrated defenses that my own words never could. She wasn't entangled in the family dynamics, wasn't susceptible to the guilt trips and emotional manipulation that had always worked on me. I've been looking at apartments, Jenna volunteered after a moment. There's one complex that has a 2-bedroom available next week. It's not as nice as our last place, but it's within our budget if Marcus gets the job at his friend's construction company. This was news to me. You have a job prospect, I asked Marcus. He nodded reluctantly. Dave offered me a position. I was going to start next Monday. You didn't mention that, my mother said, sounding surprised. Marcus shrugged. It's not great pay, and I was hoping something better would come along. Something better than being unemployed and homeless? Regina asked pointedly. Marcus had no response to that. The conversation continued with Regina gently, but firmly guiding it toward practical solutions rather than emotional manipulation. By the end of the evening, a plan had emerged. Marcus would take the job offer, he and Jenna would apply for the apartment tomorrow, and my parents would help with the security deposit. If all went well, they could move in by the weekend just before my deadline. And what about you two? Regina asked my parents. Isn't it time you headed home? We were just trying to help with the transition, my father said defensively. And now the transition is happening, Regina pointed out. Remy has made it clear he wants his home back. That includes not having his parents here either. My mother looked ready to argue but seemed to think better of it. We'll pack up tomorrow, she conceded. After Regina left, an awkward silence fell over the house. The conversation had shifted something fundamental in our family dynamic, but the adjustment would clearly take time. The next morning, true to their word, my parents began packing their things. Marcus called his friend to formally accept the job offer, and Jenna scheduled a viewing at the apartment complex. The children, sensing the change in atmosphere, asked questions that were answered with simplified versions of the truth. They would be moving to a new apartment soon, one that would be just for them. My mother approached me as I prepared to leave for work. We thought we were doing the right thing, she said. Not quite an apology, but the closest she'd come. We've always wanted what's best for both you boys. I know, I replied, because despite everything I did, believe their intentions weren't malicious. But what's best for me includes respecting my space and my choices. She nodded slowly. Regina made some points we need to think about, she admitted, about how we've handled things over the years. It wasn't full acknowledgement of the patterns Regina had identified, but it was something. A crack in the defensive wall, a hint of potential change. The day before my deadline, the pieces fell into place with surprising efficiency. Marcus and Jenna were approved for the apartment with move-in scheduled for Saturday. My parents had already departed for their own home the previous evening, taking with them some of the extra furniture and boxes to store temporarily. As Marcus and Jenna packed, a different kind of tension filled the house. Not the hostility or manipulation of recent weeks, but the awkward acknowledgement of a relationship fundamentally altered. We were all navigating new territory, trying to find our footing after the shifting of long-established patterns. Saturday morning arrived with a strange mix of emotions. Relief was predominant. My house would soon be mine again. But there was sadness too, particularly as I helped Lily and Jackson gather their toys and said goodbye to their constant presence in my daily life. "Will we still see you, Uncle Remy?" Lily asked, her small face serious. "Of course," I assured her. "I'll visit your new apartment, and maybe you can come for sleepovers sometimes." "Planned sleepovers," I added with a glance at Marcus. He had the grace to look somewhat sheepish. "We appreciate the help with the move," he said, as we loaded the last boxes into the rented truck. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Marcus it was significant acknowledgement. Jenna was more direct. "I'm sorry for how all this happened," she said quietly while the children were distracted. "It wasn't right moving in like we did. I knew it at the time, but it was easier to go along with the plan than to speak up." Her honesty was unexpected, but appreciated. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. As they drove away, I stood in my driveway, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering anger, and a touch of grief for what our family relationships could have been under healthier circumstances. Scott came over as I was standing there watching the truck disappear around the corner. "All's well that ends well?" he asked. "Something like that," I agreed, though I think ends might be too definitive. This feels more like a new beginning. I turned back to my house, empty now, except for my own possessions, some in disarray, others missing or damaged in the chaos of the past weeks. There was work to be done to restore it to my sanctuary, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe freely within my own walls. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, after weeks of constant noise and activity. But it was my quiet in my space on my terms. And that made all the difference. The first week after my family left was dedicated to reclaiming my space. I spent the weekend deep cleaning, removing sticky fingerprints from furniture, shampooing carpets stained with juice spills, and reorganizing rooms that had been rearranged without my input. The physical process of restoration became a metaphor for the emotional work happening simultaneously, scrubbing away resentment, washing off guilt, and rebuilding the boundaries that had been trampled. My home office required particular attention. The desk had been moved, the bookshelves disorganized, and several items had disappeared entirely, likely packed accidentally with my family's belongings. I ordered replacement equipment, rearranged the furniture to better suit my workflow, and added a small but significant detail: a lock on the door. Not that I expected another invasion anytime soon, but the symbolic reinforcement of my boundary felt important. The guest room, which had housed Lily and Jackson, needed a complete overhaul. Crayon marks decorated one wall, the carpet was stained in several places, and the overall energy of the space felt different. I repainted, replaced the carpet, and bought new linens. By the time I finished, it felt like my space again, ready for visitors of my choosing on my timeline. During this physical restoration, I maintained limited contact with my family. My parents called several times, their messages carrying a strange mix of tentative apology and lingering resentment. I responded with brief, cordial texts, not yet ready for lengthy conversations, where old patterns might re-emerge. Marcus and Jenna sent photos of the children in their new apartment, the unspoken message being, "See, we're doing fine without your help." I focused on the children in my responses, asking about their adjustment and promising to visit soon. This period of distance was necessary. For too long I had been available whenever my family needed something, regardless of the cost to my own well-being. Learning to set and maintain boundaries meant sometimes saying no, sometimes being less available, sometimes prioritizing my own needs above family demands. It felt uncomfortable, even selfish at times, but I recognized it as essential growth. 3 weeks after their departure, I decided it was time to address the deeper issues. I began seeing a therapist specializing in family dynamics, Dr. Lawrence. Our sessions helped me understand the patterns that had defined our family relationships for decades. What you're describing is a classic family system with rigid roles, Dr. Lawrence explained during one session. You were assigned the role of the responsible, self-sufficient one, while your brother was cast as needing protection and support. These roles served a purpose in your family's emotional economy, but they've limited both of you in different ways. This framework helped me see how my parents' behavior, while harmful, wasn't necessarily malicious. They were operating within a system they themselves had likely inherited, perpetuating patterns without conscious awareness of their impact. Understanding doesn't mean excusing. Dr. Lawrence reminded me, you can have compassion for how these patterns developed while still holding firm boundaries against behaviors that harm you. Armed with this perspective, I felt ready to reconnect with my parents on new terms. I invited them for dinner, choosing a restaurant rather than my home for this first meeting. The neutral territory helped maintain the boundary while opening space for conversation. The initial awkwardness soon gave way to surprisingly honest discussion. My mother admitted that Regina's intervention had forced them to reflect on their parenting patterns. "We never meant to favor Marcus," she said, her hands nervously folding and unfolding her napkin. "We just thought he needed more help. You always seemed so capable, so independent." "That doesn't mean I didn't need support," I pointed out gently, "or recognition for my achievements." My father nodded slowly. "We may have taken you for granted," he acknowledged. "Expected too much from you while expecting too little from your brother. That wasn't fair." The conversation wasn't perfect. Old defenses still arose at times, and there were moments of tension when perspectives diverged. But there was also genuine listening, an attempt at understanding that felt new and hopeful. We established new guidelines for our relationship moving forward. I would visit them for Sunday dinner twice a month. They would call, before coming to my house, never just drop by. Financial discussions about Marcus would not include expectations of my contribution unless I offered. These boundaries were simple, reasonable, but represented a significant shift in our family dynamic. My relationship with Marcus evolved more slowly. His initial reaction after moving out was resentment. I had disrupted the system that had benefited him for years. But as weeks passed, and he maintained his new job, something unexpected happened. He began to take pride in supporting his family independently. During a tentative coffee meeting, about a month after the move, he surprised me by saying, "It's not easy working construction after being unemployed so long. But it feels good, you know. Coming home tired because I earned the money to pay rent." "I do know," I replied, thinking of my own journey to independence. "That's why my house means so much to me. I worked hard for it." He nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "I get that better now," he admitted. "Still think you could have given us more time to figure things out, but I get why you were so angry." It wasn't a full apology, but from Marcus, it represented significant growth. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me not as the ever-accommodating brother who should adapt to his needs, but as an individual with valid boundaries and feelings. My relationship with Lily and Jackson became something I actively cultivated, separate from the complicated dynamics with their parents. I scheduled regular uncle days where I would take them to parks, museums, or movies. These planned visits were enjoyable in a way the chaotic cohabitation had not been. Quality time where I could be fully present rather than resentfully accommodating. During one such visit, Lily asked innocently, "Are you still mad at Daddy and Mommy for living in your house?" I considered how to respond in an age-appropriate but honest way. I wasn't mad that they needed help, I explained. I was upset because they didn't ask permission first. It's important to respect other people's spaces and boundaries. She nodded seriously, like how you have to knock on the bathroom door before going in. Exactly like that, I agreed, smiling at her perfect simplification. Beyond family relationships, I found myself applying the boundary-setting lessons to other areas of my life. At work, I became more assertive about my time and contributions. With friends, I practiced saying no to obligations that didn't align with my needs or values. Even in small interactions, declining unwanted solicitations or modifying restaurant orders to my preference, I found myself speaking up where I once would have silently accommodated. Scott remained a supportive presence through this evolution. Our weekend coffee tradition resumed, now enhanced by a deeper friendship forged during the family crisis. "You seem different," he observed one Saturday, as we sat on my deck. "More confident, maybe?" "I feel different," I agreed. "Like I'm finally living on my own terms, not just reacting to everyone else's expectations." "Looks good on you," he said, simply raising his mug in a small toast. I also expanded my social circle, joining a local hiking group and volunteering at a community garden. These new connections provided perspective and reinforcement as I established healthier patterns. Unlike my family, these people had no preconceived notions of who I should be or what role I should play. They accepted me as I presented myself, which was refreshingly straightforward. 6 months after the family exodus, my home was fully restored, not just to its previous state, but to something better. The physical space reflected my preferences without compromise. The emotional atmosphere was peaceful, no longer charged with tension and unspoken resentments. I had created not just a house, but a true sanctuary. More importantly, I had learned vital lessons that transformed my understanding of family boundaries and self-respect. First, loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your boundaries. In fact, healthy relationships require clear boundaries to thrive. By establishing limits on what I would and wouldn't accept, I actually created space for more authentic connections with my family. Second, guilt is a powerful but unreliable guide for decision-making. The guilt I felt when standing up for myself wasn't evidence that I was wrong. It was the discomfort of disrupting long-established patterns. Learning to distinguish between genuine remorse for harmful actions and conditioned guilt for normal boundary setting was transformative. Third, saying no to exploitation isn't selfish. It's necessary self-respect. By refusing to let my family take advantage of me, I wasn't rejecting them, I was rejecting an unhealthy dynamic that ultimately harmed all of us. True generosity comes from free choice, not coercion or manipulation. Fourth, change in family systems is possible, but requires courage and consistency. The initial resistance to my boundaries was intense, but by maintaining them with clarity and compassion, I eventually catalyzed shifts in even the most entrenched family patterns. And finally, sometimes, the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Standing firm against the tidal wave of family expectation and emotional manipulation was painful, but it opened the path to genuine growth and healthier relationships for everyone involved. My journey wasn't about cutting ties with family, but about redefining those connections on more equal, respectful terms. It wasn't about refusing to help loved ones in need, but about ensuring that help was given freely, not taken without consent. In the end, protecting my peace taught both myself and my family what genuine respect looks like. And that lesson, though difficult, was perhaps the most valuable gift I could have given to all of us. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't understand your need for space and respect? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. We all deserve to have our boundaries respected, and sometimes sharing our stories helps others find the courage to stand up for themselves too. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone in your life.